Guys, welcome back. This is Show Sniper. So today a few cards came in the mail. First of all, this big lot. Not big, but several cards. Let me just do a quick count here. I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 28. 28 cards. So this all came from one seller, and I believe he was probably a raw set collector. And I love buying from these collectors because very high chance these cards are in very good condition, and they are. Most of them are pretty well centered. We'll take a quick look, and that's what I look for. As you all may know, the Desert Shield set does suffer from a lot of centering issues, and these cards are pretty well centered. Now, I don't expect, like all my other raw cards, I don't expect these to grade very highly, like probably PSA 6 to 8 at most. Because I really think that if the cards had the potential of grading a PSA 10, it would definitely be in slabs by now. Now, there are a few cards here that, while I know won't grade well, I was happy to see in such condition. And for example, one is the Bob Welch, which I've mentioned before, which is really hard to find in well-centered and in very decent condition. Now the centering is tad bit off top bottom, but overall I think this is a very nice eye appeal Bob Welch. Most of the Bob Welch you'll find on eBay is either diamond cut or have a lot of surface issues, or that it's really off centered. And this one looks great. So I believe this is my third Bob Welch. Every time I see one that's in really good shape, I will definitely try to bid on it or buy it, whatever. So yeah, this is a pretty nice one. If you look at the shield here, it's pretty nice stamp. Okay, so now let's have a quick look under my new toy here. By the way, I have a digital microscope and has LED lights here as well, and these are great for raw cards. Okay, not so for slabs, but honestly you don't really need to look. Well, you may, but you don't really need to put slabs under a digital microscope when you're in a show anyways, because you're buying the grade anyways. So I don't know if you can see this, but let's have a look at the corners. Okay, so you may not be able to see this, but there's a bit of corner chipping here, but nothing that I think is unexpected or out of the ordinary. A little bit of corner chipping at the bottom right as well. The bottom edge should be more severe, and in this case it's actually not that bad. Okay, and let's have a look at the bottom left corner. Okay, the chipping is slightly more severe here. And then, yeah, some more chipping on the top left corner. Yeah. So believe it or not, though, this actually the chipping actually occurs with PSA 10s as well. So to say, oh, there's chipping on this Bob Welch, so it's it's not going to grade really well. That's not true. But for there are certain issues that are very significant that I can tell you will affect the grading. And first is, let me see if I can find, is this roller mark here. Okay, and I mentioned this before in previous videos, where if your card has a roller mark, it's most likely going to grade like less than a PSA 7. or maybe PSA 7. Anyways, but yeah, so this one does have a roller mark, but I don't really mind because I do have the Bob Welch graded. However, it's nice to have a very nice high eye appeal copy, and which this is. So let's have a look at the other, which is also well known to be very costly at a high grade, which is the Kevin Napier. Now, centering wise, it's not perfect. It's definitely off centered left to right and top bottom. But overall, I think it's not that bad. Has great eye appeal. And I can see at least two of the corners. The left top and bottom is slightly soft. But let's have a look. So the first corner here, yeah, that's slightly chipped. And then same here. The bottom right's not that bad. Slightly chipped as well. And all four corners are slightly chipped. Now, you may say, well, what's the difference between chipping and a soft corner or a ding from storage or handling? Well, the chipping comes from the manufacturing process when these cards were cut, and probably cut from like a dull blade of some sort. When it's a ding, it's usually when the card drops on some sort of a surface, hard surface, and then or in a more severe case, it would be a dent, or that some sort of a when the card corners are rubbed against something over time, and then it will create like a soft corner. But in this case, as you can see, these cards were pretty well kept, and I think that the reason why I can see that is because overall the shape of these corners are sharp. Okay, if you can see here, like I think this is like the original corner, meaning that the card was never damaged in any way. It, this is probably how these corners came out from manufacturing, and so that's why I said I was very happy to pick up these cards from the seller because the cards were very, very well kept. And I have a second lot coming from the seller. It was unfortunate. Now, let me tell you a little bit of the story. Basically, because I'm an international buyer, okay, these cards are being shipped from the States to Hong Kong, which is where I'm at. And so the shipping is very, very crazy. Okay, so for example, for these 28 cards, in order for them to ship to Hong Kong, even with combined shipping, I think the shipping would have cost like probably double of what these cards cost. And we're talking about like a few $100s at least. So I spoke to the seller and asked, hey, if I give you a list, would you be able to give me, would you be able to sell me in the lot? And I could save some money on the shipping. And not all sellers are willing to do that because, first of all, um, it's their time, and secondly, um, it's they. Not everyone cares about the fact that you're paying a lot on the international shipping. So um, the seller was very nice enough to do so, and I gave him a long list, and that's why I bought a second lot, by the way, because it's so much savings on these beautiful cards, and I end up saving like I think it was like something crazy, like $300-400 in shipping. And for those that don't know how this works, basically eBay international shipping to somewhere in Asia from the States, it's probably going to cost you about $15 to $29 US. Okay, and that's pretty crazy if you're buying like one card, right? Let's say this card is like $10 or $8, and you're paying $15, which is probably the minimum for international shipping for this card. And let's say even if you bought a lot like this with 28 cards and ends up the shipping, it goes down all the way to like $4 or $5. By the way, there's a limit for that because once it goes over to a like a certain weight, eBay has to separate the lot. So it's not like, oh well, I would just buy like 1,000 cards and split it amongst that $15 shipping. You can't do that. I think the maximum is probably like 6 or 7 cards. And so you'll end up paying like $2, $3 per card, which is a lot if you're buying, raw cards like these for what, $4 to $10, and you're paying extra $2, $3 of shipping, which is quite crazy. But that's the cost of buying from eBay if you're overseas. Okay, we don't get that privilege of buying, local shipping. And I know I hear everyone talk about like getting cards shipped for like less than $1, and which is something I envy of all you guys in the States. So yeah, so basically, the seller's nice enough to ship all of that, and I saved a lot of money on the shipping. And he, as you can see, the seller also listened to me and shipped everything in the sleeve and top loaders, which I was super happy about. And in return, I just told them, you know what, like originally I had given an offer for these cards. I said, just scrap it. Just give me everything in original price, just for your troubles. And in theory, I saved a lot of money on the shipping already. So yeah, so I'm always looking for buyers of sellers like these, which doesn't pop up that much, because a lot of times it's either sellers of higher priced cards, like graded cards, or that even if they have a small lot, it's not like they have they sell other things as well, and it's not like they're very concentrated on Desert Shield set. So it's not like I can pick out easily, 20, 50 cards or whatever. Yeah, this is a lot of 28, and I think I'm a lot of 26 coming. And this is, a selection from a lot of what 300 to 400 cards that that they have on their listing. So in order for me to select a small number of cards, they must have a lot of cards on hand first, because not every card is what I'm looking for. That's what I'm saying. But anyways, so very happy to add these to my raw collection. And although I'm still missing quite a few cards, the raw collection is definitely coming by. Now, the other 2 cards I bought was, I came across this first, which is the John Candelaria, former Blue Jays. This is PSA 9. Now, I want to talk about this once again. I want to talk about PSA 9s and 10s once again. This at a 10 would probably go somewhere, I think in today's prices, is probably like, what, $500 to $600 easily. Now, is that something I want to pay for a John Candelaria? I'm not sure. I mean, sure, if money wasn't a problem, I would not mind getting my whole set of graded Desert Shield cards in the PSA 10. But these are getting super, super pricey. And that's when I look for really nice high eye appeal 9s. Now, I put these through my digital microscope, and I can tell you that my second card here is a Tom O'Malley, by the way, which is a PSA 10. I can tell you that both these cards have the same type of chipping wear, and centering is pretty close. Okay, so I definitely don't think, if they're different in any ways in centering, that the centering is the issue why this got a 9 over this got a 10. I truly think that the difference between these 2 grades are simply from different graders. Okay, so as a collector though, or as an investor, long-term investor, I got to look at this way. Okay, I could spend. Okay, by the way, the O'Malley wasn't that expensive, so that's why I bought the PSA 10. Okay, and the difference between the O'Malley and the Candelaria is that this has a PSA population of, I think, 22, and the Candelaria had probably like a PSA population of 14, something like that, or 9 actually. I'm not too sure, but it was a low number. However, I also look at the fact that is how many people are actually looking for these cards, and that especially for a John Candelaria. And first of all, the 10 wasn't available, but if it was available, I'm sure with that pop count, we're looking at over $500 for this card. I mean, for a Hall of Famer or a star, I would easily pay that price for a PSA 10 at the current pricing right now. But for a common, okay, no disrespect to John Candelaria, but for a common player, that's quite expensive. Now, for example, this was like I bought this for around $100. If I think this was also around $100 or less, slightly less. Now, by not buying a 10, I could buy several of these PSA 10s. And not to mention, while having a PSA 10 on your hand is, you know, feels great, right? Like you have the highest graded copy. You will also, there deep inside, you'll know that come one day when you're trying to sell this John Candelaria, it's not going to be easy. Okay, and I'm not saying that these cards don't hold value, but it's because of the low pop count and the premium on these low pop counts. Let me just put these down. There's only two types of buyers, and I mentioned this before, that will buy these cards. First of all, someone that's trying to complete a set, with PSA 9 or 10, or strictly a PSA 10 set. Not a lot of people are ambitious enough to attempt that because it's very, very costly. Um, you know, I, I'm, I've spent so much money on my current collection at the moment, and I'm not even close to complete. I'm about probably 1/5 complete in terms of the high grade PSA 9s and 10s. I do have some other grades, but in terms of just PSA 9s and 10s, I'm about probably 1/4, maybe 1/4, not 1/5. But still, that's still a long way to go, and I feel like I've spent so much money on these cards already. But if I had focused more on the nines, especially earlier, a few years ago, if I spent more money on the nines rather than tens, I would have had a lot more cards in slabs. And not to mention, these cards have gone up in price a lot. Okay, one example, let's just say the Kirby Puckett PSA 9 versus the PSA 10. The PSA 10s is definitely over $1,000. Okay, and even back in 2022 when I got into the Desert Shield set, the PSA 10 was easily $300-400. Now back then you could have gotten a PSA 9 for less than $150. Okay, and now the PSA 9 Kirby Puckett is around $400. Now, same scenario. Now, I mean, if I could afford it, I would buy the PSA 10, especially a player like Kirby Puckett, right? But I'd be really happy with a high IPO PSA 9, which doesn't come by that often. I mean, I bought one recently, um, and I bought another BGS 9 earlier. However, I mean, these pop up like once or twice a year on eBay. Okay, ones that are not off-centered and look like they're PSA 9 um, worthy. So in that scenario, once again, I think the PSA 9 collector definitely won in terms of getting more for the money, more bang for the buck, as they say. Because if you had bought a Kirby Puckett PSA 9 for about $150 back in 2022, and it's now selling for an average of $400 or more dollars, right? That's over 200% return. And but if you bought the PSA 10 back in 2022 for what, anywhere from $500 to $600 probably, and then we're looking at, I would say, probably around $2,000 for the card in value, but I'm not sure what was the last transaction online, but it's probably closer to 1,000. I wouldn't say 2,000, but I'm thinking more $1,000. Um, while that's still a pretty nice profit from $500-600, it's nearly not as good as the PSA 9. And not to mention, with PSA 9, you could have easily bought a couple more copies and made a huge flip with these cards. And why wouldn't you, right? It's Kirby Puckett. It's not like a common player, it's a star player. So I do think that, especially with the current scenario with PSA grading and how they're kind of inconsistent, and how everyone's chasing for a 10, certain nines are still very, very undervalued. Okay. And so if you can pick up certain cards at PSA 9 and they're selling for significantly less, I would definitely do so. Okay, one card that is in that same scenario is also, well, was in that scenario, and recently I've seen the price has gone up a lot, is Roger Clemens. Okay, back like maybe 2 years ago, if you bought like a Roger Clemens PSA 9, you could still probably get one for less than $150. And now the PSA 9s are like selling for $200, $250 or even more if it's in really high eye appeal. So once again, this is another card where, if similar case, if you find one that the PSA 9 and 10s vary quite a bit in pricing and a star player, and you find a 9 in high eye appeal, I'll definitely buy the 9, because history tells us over time the 9 will give you a better return, or or will build better value for your collection. Okay, I know not all of us are flipping cards, and I don't flip Desert Shield cards myself, but overall, you do want your collection to build value. Okay, so that's what I want to talk about today, is like how you can build better value in your collection by buying smarter. Okay, now the last thing I want to talk about is, I've been waiting for this and it arrived pretty quickly, but I think I'm the first one in Asia probably to have bought this book, Pops and Comps by Jeremy Lee. So I guess everyone knows who Jeremy Lee is. And this is probably an understatement, but he's a YouTuber online that talks a lot about high-end cards, and he recently bought this amazing shoeless Joe Jackson. And, someone that I know, or I feel that knows what he's talking about. And this book is about, as it says, truth, insights, and psychology behind the numbers and drive the sports card market. Now, as we, avid collectors may want to think that we know how this game is played, I think it's really important to read up on a lot of this information here, because obviously Jeremy knows what he's talking about, and he's been buying, trading cards, talking about cards for a very long time. And I'm pretty sure he's a very smart collector himself. And it's also nice to hear, a third opinion from an expert like him, to see how we should be collecting cards, we should be sourcing for cards, and how we should be valuing cards. So I don't know. Well, if Jeremy's watching, I would like to know whether or not I'm like the first one to buy this book here in Asia. Because I say that because there's not a lot of collectors here in Hong Kong, right? And sure, there's some collectors in Taiwan and Japan, but these places, I may be wrong, but there's not a lot of like English-speaking collectors. They're probably more like local collectors, which I'm not sure. I mean, although this is not a big book, but I'm not sure if in those markets whether or not they'd be interested in reading a big book like this, unless Jeremy decides to make a Japanese translated version or a Chinese translated version. Now then that will be a totally different scenario. But anyways, I'm super excited to have received this yesterday, so I can start reading this over the weekend and get some insight about collecting cards and PSA pop values. So that's it for me today. Oh, one more thing. If anyone's interested in the digital microscope, this is the packaging. I think, these are probably OEM. So you'll find a lot of these microscopes that look exactly the same, but, with different packaging. It's a pretty good tool to have, especially when you're at a card show. Okay, I mentioned how I have another one that you need to connect through Wi-Fi to an app, and that one's actually even better. But the thing is, connecting to an app is actually more inconvenient when you're at a show and you have to take out your phone and all that. And this is more inconvenient because there's a screen right here, and you can just and you don't need to connect through a Wi-Fi. And not to mention the LED light here is very helpful. And also it has a SD card slot. So let's just say you're buying a card for someone else and they want to see a condition of the card. You can press this button here and then it will take photos. I don't have the card in here right now, so I can't show you guys, but it'll take a photo as you take a look at the corners or whatever, and you can show people, the corner where it would be nice if there was like a Wi-Fi connection where you could transfer the files over. But I think nowadays, you can just easily just plug the SD card into some sort of adapter, phone adapter, and you can just transfer all those files over to your phone. But I bought this for about like $10 US, which is really, really cheap. And it's very, very light, and you can have it in your jean pocket or whatever. So it's very convenient, and it comes with this like tiny magnifying glass. Which honestly, like if you have the digital microscope, why bother with a magnifying glass, right? But nice little additional tool. So yeah, if you're interested, please have a look. They sell these on Amazon, eBay, and elsewhere online. So it's about $10. I think anywhere below $30, to be honest, is worthy, because it's pretty well built. Although it's light, it doesn't feel cheap. Okay, if anyone cares about the build of these things, it does feel like it's something that will last a pretty long time. So, anyways, thanks for watching. And please like and subscribe my videos. If you have any questions about the cards I've shown you today, or this great book written by Jeremy Lee, comment below, and talk to you guys later. Bye now.